Thank you very much. And yes, the word agency, as it's come to be known in the English language as knowing how to take action. Of course, there are many other meanings of the word agency, but a psychologist in the 1960s started to think about agency as knowing how to act on a particular problem. That hasn't got an equivalent in many other languages either. In French, it doesn't have an equivalent. In Dutch and German, it doesn't have an equivalent. And in Danish, apparently also not. So that's potentially part of the problem, that we don't really have a mind to think about how are we developing our ability to act on these big problems. And we heard in the questions before we all broke into our conversations that quite a few of the questions were about what are we going to do about this? How do we take action on this? And I'm going to focus on a subset of that, is how do we talk about these problems in a way that it can drive action across society and then also avoids polarization. I'm a neuroscientist by background, and some 20-25 years ago I became interested in how people form beliefs and how that then leads them to become really entrenched in a belief system where then they start clashing with other people. So then the polarization that we saw coming up in society was one of the things that I was really interested in. And at first I was just looking at that at large, like we were having the war in Iraq, we were having certain political events that were happening in different parts of the world where people became more and more fighting with other groups across society. And climate became part of that somewhere along the line. In the beginning, like 25 years ago, climate wasn't polarized. There was not a lot of talked about it, there was not a lot of done about it, but sort of in the mid-2000s, if you look at opinion polls, then pretty much everyone is concerned about climate change, and pretty much everyone thought we needed to do something about it, and then things started to go wrong. Now, one of the things that before I go into what I'm actually going to be talking about, everything that I'm going to be talking about here is descriptive today. It's about how the human brain works. It is how you can make it work in whatever job you have, as working in media, as working in communities, as working as a scientist trying to influence policymakers, rather than telling you what to do. For each of you, there will be ways to take these insights and to apply them to your own way of working. Now, as I was saying, when I started to look at this as a neuroscientist, looking at how people become really passionately engaged with certain topics, I learned something along the way from lots of other people who had been looking at this before, from the 1950s, when psychologists started to look at this, all the way to modern day neuroscience. The thing that I learned, the most important thing, is that when people become deeply engaged with an issue, it is usually because they take some action first. We do something, and the doing changes the stuff that sits inside our heads. The knowledge, the beliefs, the awareness, the feeling responses that we might have about something. So action is the driver of beliefs, awareness, a response of caring, etc. When somewhere around the 2010s, when I started to work with climate scientists and with people working in the climate movement, I realized that there was a conventional wisdom present there, which was the opposite. That if only we give people the knowledge, if we change their beliefs, if we raise their awareness, if we get some kind of feeling response from them, that then they will take action or their behavior will change. It's not that it never works, it sometimes works that way, but for very obvious reasons, with these big problems, systemic problems, wicked problems as they are sometimes called, it's not that simple. And the reason why this thing doesn't work that well, that conventional wisdom, is that very often we run into barriers and we don't know how to overcome those. And those barriers could be things that exist in the system, in our surroundings, things that make us act in a certain way and make it really hard to act differently. but they often also include other people. We're trying to influence other people and we don't know how to respond to the fact that they might not want to do the thing that we would like them to do. Now, a side note, when I'm talking about this, I'm not just talking about people and their consumption behavior. That's one place where that plays out, but it also plays out with politicians, with policymakers, decision makers in business, finance, and media. All of us have our own way of saying, we're already doing everything we can't do more than we're already doing. We don't know how to overcome these barriers. Even politicians, the people that you think would have the power to change this. We ran a training program for parliamentarians of the UK Parliament a few years ago. The dozen that joined our training program, all of them came with that sentiment of like, we want to do more, we don't know how we can do more, because we have all of these other concerns, all of these other demands on the things that we should be caring about. So, not knowing how to overcome barriers is a thing that gets in the way. But when it comes to what sits at that side there, the knowledge, beliefs, awareness, and feelings, when you join meetings that happen about how do we get society to act more about climate change, it will often end in a debate between some or all of these things. So some people say, no, we need to give people knowledge and information. Other people say, no, we need to speak to people's emotions. And in the UK, at least, where I go to most of these meetings, these discussions are so prevalent, they are so omnipresent, that you almost can play bingo on the amount of times that these statements will come up. And that's why I made this bingo card here to tick off the moments in meetings where the discussion is between people who think that it's about providing facts and information and other people who think that it's about speaking to people's emotions, but then they start fighting with each other about whether it's like scaring people or giving them hope or balancing fear and hope, right? You may have had some of these discussions in the breakout room. Now, it's not to say that none of these things are important. So facts and information are important. I'm a scientist. I care about facts and information. And I do understand that we have emotional responses to things and that those are really important, etc. But when it comes to the question of what can drive action in society, what can make people think that they have a sense to take action, the question of which of these is better is the answer is none of them. None of these is actually really good at driving action in society, specifically because implicit in all of those debates that people have is that providing facts and information and speaking to people's emotions is or should be about the problem, the crisis, the emergency. And if you're thinking about it in that way, none of these are particularly effective at driving societal change. They have a role in there. Facts and information, like the briefings we got this morning, are important, but they are not the driver of change. They are usually something that people will become interested in once they start taking some action. Then they will start seeking out facts and information. So, what's the alternative? If that sort of conventional wisdom isn't the easiest way to go about this, let's just look at very, very basic psychological level. We have two ways of learning how to overcome barriers. And all of you who have kids know this from the way that you've raised your kids. The first one is by doing, and the second one is social. What do I mean with that? The first one is that we constantly learn by doing. We do something, we learn from that, we do something else, we learn from that again. That's one loop of how we develop our own skills, competencies, our own ways of acting in the world around us. And then the second important source of learning, maybe even more important than this learning by doing, is that we see other people learn by doing. We see other people run into a challenge, overcome that challenge, and then we look at them and we say like, oh, if they can do that, I could do that as well. And that is called social learning in the psychological literature. So, as I said, for all of you who have kids, you know that there is this age range where your kids just start copying everything that you are doing, right? That is one way that plays out. There are so many places in society where we know this. For example, surgeons have this motto, when they learn how to become a surgeon, see an operation, do one, and teach one. And those three things are what make a surgeon a very qualified surgeon. So surgeons aren't sitting in a room being briefed about the fact that if they don't operate a person, that person will die. They learn by doing how to rescue that person. Okay, what does that mean for communication? For when we come to how we are talking about climate change, how we are writing about it in the media, etc. The golden nugget here is that we need to tell stories of doing, not stories just to raise concern. We need to tell the stories about what we are doing in response to all of the problems that we heard about this morning, rather than just the problem describing the problem itself. And the reason why this is important is that this is allowing that seeing other people learn by doing. So a story of someone overcoming a problem allows people to do that social learning, to see someone else solve a problem. And the three benefits that it gives you is that the first one is it builds agency. It builds that ability to take action yourself. You see someone solve a problem, you can be inspired by that and learn how you could solve a similar problem in your own context. My favorite example here is Greta Thunberg. She wasn't sitting in a room thinking or figuring out what to do. She saw people in California, young people in California, take to the streets and protesting about a school shooting. And when she saw them, she went like, if they can do that about this school shooting, I can do this about climate change. So her initial action was inspired by other people's action, and then in turn inspired lots of other people to act as well. The second thing is that actually action also is the best way to signal the urgency and the scale of the problem. We have in every language sayings of the type, actions speak louder than words, right? And I'm sure Danish has one. But to just put that in context, if someone were to run in from that door and shout fire and then run out that door, we'd probably all follow. But if they shouted fire and then they sat down here, we would go like, what an idiot are you? Why are you doing this, right? So that's, the action is the thing that we're following, not just the words that accompany the action. And say a story where you go like, rather than saying, these are the problems, therefore we need to take urgent action. If you flip that on its head and you go like, we are doing all of these things, why are we doing them? Because there is a need to take urgent action. And then the final one is that action fights despair. Stories of action fights despair. They go against that feeling that nothing is happening, and which you get amongst certain parts of the population, that nothing is happening. Of course, not enough is happening, but it's not the case that nothing is happening to deal with this. A couple of examples from the media space. This is an example called the Local Storytelling Exchange. A few years ago, we worked together with an organization that was setting up an initiative where they were stationing journalists in different parts of the country. And these journalists needed to find stories, local stories for the local press on climate change. And we trained them in what we call action-based storytelling, where you tell the story about the actions. And so that group of people, or that project, really took that on board. And they now have hundreds and hundreds of these stories of transformation driven by individuals and communities in their database and in the social press. And I was chatting to Bent during, and so there are these communities in in Denmark as well, who are doing all of that work, and these stories of action are stories that signal that something can happening or is happening. We worked with another organization to create a storytelling tool to allow local authorities to talk to their citizens about net zero and the change that needs to happen to get to net zero. That was an example of stories of policy and systems change to make local transformation possible. So none of it was about individual behavior change. All of it was about like what policy changes do we need in order to make net zero possible. We had an Indian student come and work with us for a while. She went back to India. She set up what she called the Climapreneur Show, where she did interviews with green entrepreneurs in India. And all of these were stories of action. All of these were stories of like, I didn't know how to do this. I really wanted to do this. Everyone thought I was crazy. I overcame all of my challenges, and now I'm running a successful business. That's also good for the planet. So examples of of actions for entrepreneurs. Newsrooms and the way that the media responds to this. A French journalist who worked for the national TV in France joined one of our training programs, and then she became the climate editor for France TV. And she made lots of different changes in there, but one of the changes was that she said, I know that as responsible for the news, we will have to report on climate disasters. I know that, there's no way around it, I can't change that. But I really want to tell stories of action. And actually, we don't need to wait until a disaster happens to know what story of action we need. We can predict that in the summer there will be a heat wave and a drought, and in the winter there might be floods. So they send reporters out months in advance to communities that have taken action to build resilience against some of these disasters. They film them months in advance, they keep it on the shelf until the flood happens or until the heat wave happens. And then they compare a disaster story with an action story. And so she now has 10 journalists working at her climate desk, trying to find these stories of action to balance them out with the stories of disaster. So you may not have the access to 10 journalists, but all of you can do that thinking about how can we preemptively get a story of action ready that we can pair with a predictable story of disaster that will be coming our way. Fiction, this is a fiction book, stories of bold solutions to deal with big future climate challenges. This is the first time that I saw a climate novel be a real source of agency for people. It's not the best book in the world, but it is the best climate novel in the world, according to what I've read so far. Policymakers need action stories too. The policymakers we're working with also go like, we don't know how to do more. We ran a program a few years ago where we brought local councils, local authorities together with university experts, and together they tackled very specific problems for their local organizations. So some of it was, I'm almost done, yeah. Some of it was to do with the way that the council does its procurement, that it buys stuff and that it accounts for the emissions, the scope 3 emissions. Other things was about how are we engaging people. And then the best projects that we had, we took them and we wrote an action story about it, and we published it in a magazine for local councillors, so for elected local councillors. So it was a story of action for a specific niche audience. And I'm going to leave it at that. My last example, I'll skip that one. Lots of stuff to look into further on, and any questions?
So then we open for questions, and until I see hands, I ask, okay, great. Can I just borrow? I'll be the runner here. Ah, great.
Thank you for a great presentation, Kris, and it was really just my gospel. You were talking about polarization in the beginning. I would love to hear you a little bit about how to. So we build local green behavior groups and assist great activists all around, and then trying to help them talk to their neighbors. But the whole process in this polarized environment of what kinds of actions might actually compel a conducive environment for pro-climate action in the climate council or at the national level. I mean, what kinds of ways of being strategic about engaging people in an action that is also depolarizing, because we have a lot of polarizing.
Yes, indeed. Polarization, the polarization we're seeing emerge right now is because we are actually not having a good action response to climate. And because it remains a problem, our opinions about what to do about it will fragment. That's another part of our psychological insights that we're using a lot in the work that we do. When it comes to how do you, so often actually you can get people to do something together even if they disagree with each other about certain points related to it. So in one project that we did, we had climate skeptics come in a workshop together with people who weren't climate skeptical, and they were absolutely not connecting on the climate aspect. When it came to food growing at home, all of a sudden there was a connection. So often you do find that there is something you can do with a person that you might fundamentally disagree with on certain things. Beyond that, there's another aspect that is really important. Not every action will work with every person or with every group in society. And there's a lot of good work on values, on how for a psychologist, values are the answer to the question, what's important to you in your life? How that translates into why people would want to get engaged in certain actions and not in other actions. And so it might be important for some of the work that you are doing to do a bit of segmentation and to think about, okay, so these kinds of actions are going to work with these groups in society, and we're going to need other kinds of actions to get to other groups in society. There's a very good book that gives you an insight into a very good segmentation model called What Makes People Tick by Chris Rawls. You know it? Okay, all right. So then you have, that's, from my mind, the best information out there, and that really tells you that you need to find these different action possibilities for different groups in society.
And how about at the state level, if the state were to, I mean, Ireland has gone far together with a colleague or a former colleague of yours. How about the British government in terms of creating action programs that lifts that kind of engagement from citizens, broadly speaking?
That's a good question, but it's not an easy one to answer because like wherever we have tried it in the past in the UK, you can often do something at a local level because you have access to a local authority, but it's really hard to get access to a national set of civil servants that then feel they can actually take things forward. There are examples where we are managing, but there are many examples where it's really not easy. So.
Hi, thank you. So I know that there are many people here that are from the media, working in media institutions, and I'm a climate activist, and I have noticed that much of the news stories about climate activism now is very much centered on conflicts, that some people did this action, and then there are some people that are mad. And when I'm interviewed about some other people's actions, it's always about, don't you think people are going to get mad at the climate movement for doing these kinds of things? And it's so crazy because I can see that I know many of these people doing these actions, and they're the sweetest, kindest, like more nice people I know, but they are portrayed in these stereotypes of these crazy climate activists. And I know that there's so much thinking and strategizing and so much community building that are behind some of these actions. And I don't know, maybe you can, I would like to hear your point, like your viewpoints on how could the media report on climate activism in ways that are much more inspiring and less polarizing, and could actually inspire many more people to take action rather than focusing on all the people that are really mad now?
Such a good question. It would be by and of course, like the reporting that happens in the immediate aftermath of some campaign will not allow for that. But there will be lots of places where longer form journalism allows a journalist to really become like, find out how a particular organization works, how they do build community. We were talking about like communities coming together and community building before. A lot of that will happen in the space where you're working as well. So longer form journalism could tell these stories of people coming together, finding actions that they can take together and all of that. And at the moment, indeed, it is just the throwing soup on a painting that then makes it into the headlines, that then only highlights the opinion clash there is between different people, rather than thinking about this as developing action possibilities, developing an action competency to take action forward. I would have to say, though, that when you go to agency, and the psychologist who came up with this, his name was Bandura, he made a distinction between what he called individual agency, proxy agency, and collective agency. And individual agency where we know how to do something, proxy agencies where we want someone else to do something, and collective agencies where we come together and we do something that we can't do on our own. For risk of taking a position here, when the activism movement only focuses on proxy agency, it will not make a lot of difference, because if you're only coming together as activists and saying we want politicians to act, then it will still only activate that polarization response. But I know that climate movement is also doing a lot of collective agency building. And so if you can highlight the collective agency in the stuff you are doing, but then also in how the press is talking about that, that would then get to that place where the agency is building across the whole of society, and that would then lead in a better direction. Yeah.
I think there is another question somewhere around here.
Yes. Hello, thank you very much for a very inspiring presentation. My name is Lars Petersen and I am an environmental sociologist. First, just very brief motivation for my question, which is that I have, for a couple of projects, investigated sort of a transition towards climate-friendly vacation practices, right? And what I've found is that some have been inspired by sort of your bingo plate and taken that responsibility, this climate concern, and travel in ways that are, you know, with less impact on the climate. But it's like a niche phenomenon, and they actually engage in kinds of scenarios with social learning. They talk with their colleagues, some educate their pupils at the high school, and some of them meet interest, others meet aggression. But it's like there is a limit to how much that social learning or social contagion will spread. So what would be, how can that limit be overcome? That's my question, I guess.
That's a big question. Let me see if I can come up with a brief answer to that. So, if you're looking at the best theories that are out there about how behavior changes and how society changes, and you put the best of sociology together with the best of psychology, then you see that it's actually three things that are always happening at once. The environment in which we are making our choices, the beliefs that we have, the attitudes that we have, the stuff that sits inside our heads about how we can take action, and then the behavior that we are actually doing. Where then sometimes behavior can change our attitudes, but our attitudes can also drive our behavior, as your research is showing. But a lot of the time, it's actually the environmental factors, the context factors around us that drive our behavior far more often than any conscious deliberation. So I would say it's interventions at those three levels that will make the big progress happening. So some kind of policy interventions that makes it easier or cheaper to access the kind of practices that you really want to see spreading. So I'm a big fan of, for example, practice theory in sociology and combining that with more behavioral theories from social psychology. At the moment, it's not happening enough.
I think that will be the last question.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. My name is Christian, and I'm an actor and also leading a small organization that's called, translated to Danish, Sustainable Culture Now. And I might be the only one representing like arts and culture in this room here, so thank you for this invitation. but I think it's also mirroring the absence sometimes of arts and culture in this huge process. And what we're working with is to bring the voice of arts and culture into this whole agenda. And to give an example is from England, there's the Theatre Green Book movement, which has been translated as a method, as a tool that's been translated to 23 languages. It's a global movement that addresses how to create theatre, specifically performing arts, to a greater green standard. And I think my question is, how do you experience arts and culture being a driving force or supporting this whole agenda, like in a more European or global scale?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've been in the UK context for a long time. I met in 2013 a guy there called Peter Gingold, who had set up something called Tipping Point, which was about bringing arts and culture people together with scientists to get better plays and art experiences about climate change. And one of the things that he learned, and that also then we picked up on later on, is that often the arts response to the climate crisis has been one of trying to raise the concern about this. And that hasn't worked very well. It has always worked with a niche audience. So any kind of play that has been scheduled about that in the UK does well with a niche audience, but it doesn't really then do much in shifting society at large. A while ago, I was doing a similar longer workshop for people working in the creative side of TV, so the fiction TV. And one director of an independent production company that produces a lot of work for the BBC picked up on that action-based storytelling and said, that's what's been missing for us. And we've always only been trying to get people concerned about climate change. So he's now interested in seeing how can we build those, and they can even be just like short snippets of action inside a story that isn't about climate change at all, but where you are showing, where you're modeling something that would make a difference for how people think about it and how they act on it. But yeah, there's a huge role for the arts and creative practitioners to get involved in this. But it won't be as effective if they are only focusing, again, on the problem, on the crisis.